Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 9th of July. Today we have a lot of interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about our Seversk for this area, and this morning the Russian sources announced that the Russians took town by the name of Grigorievka, this one. There were a lot of bloody clashes around this town. If you remember, this is the area where the Georgian convoy was destroyed while retreating. This is the area that is under protection of, we can say, like Free Russian Democratic Republic forces. So the force who is opposite to the official Russian authorities. So these forces were defeated, and the Russians established control over Grigorievka. If we take a look at the West Sources map, you see that the West Sources map is not updated. But if we take a look at the Russian Sources map, you see that there is an icon above this town saying that the Russians took control. Furthermore, the Russians moved their gray line, and we can say that the battle for Serebryanka has begun. If we are talking about the battle for Seversk in the global scope, this battle hasn't started yet because today I heard some Russian military experts and they confirmed our thoughts, our discussion about this area, that as soon as some movements are going to start from Yampol towards this coast, towards this bank of the river, towards Zakitna, Platonovka, Dronivka, exactly these movements will begin the final battle for Seversk. So Grigorievka has fallen. Today we got some confirmation updates about tank battle. There was a tank battle in this area. The Russians were attacking with their tanks from Ukrainian side in this area, and after that they entered the city. And now I think that there is a clear operation. The Russians are trying to demine this area and to spot the rest of Ukrainians. This area was hard to take because of this small forest. You know that Ukrainians, they have changed their tactic, at least in this area, and a lot of Russian military experts confirmed these changes, that now the Ukrainians allows the Russians to enter the town, to enter some bag, and as soon as they do this, they start to attack the Russians from small forests, from like a green zone, like forest and high grass and so on. And we can see that the battle for Serebryanka has started. If we're talking about Serebryanka, I don't think that this town would be very difficult to take, for many reasons. First of all, this town is located on the lowland in comparison with Grigorievka, and you see that there is no place to hide. Well, let's take a look at this map. You see that the Russians are moving along the river, and of course the Russians have some forces on this bank of the river, and these forces, some commandos. So that's why I think that this town will be taken from three sides. This town is going to be taken from the north by commandos. They will try to fix from Grigorievka, and of course somewhere from the this area between these two forests, like between this area. And I think that as soon as Serebryanka falls, we can say that the battle for Seversk has started, because as soon as Serebryanka falls, I'm sure that the forces from Yampol will start their operation towards Zakitna, and Seversk will be attacked from at least three sides: from Serebryanka, from Verkhnekamenskaya, and from Zakotnaya Platonovka. It's about the territory expansion. I have updated the map, the West Sources map, just for better understanding of the situation on the front line. You see that Grigorievka, Belogorovka is colored in red, showing that the real control of this territory. Also, I colored the Sporne because according to the West Sources map, this town is still under the Ukrainians, but this town is already under the Russians for more than like a few days. So I'll just add some arrows. So now we see the attack towards Serebryanka from like 3 sides, and of course from Sporna towards Ivano-Darivka and towards Verkhnekamenskaya. The most successful operation, the most successful defense operation the Ukrainians has near Verkhnekamenskaya, because there is like a strict road that connects Seversk and Verkhnekamenskaya. I haven't heard any reports from the Russian sources that they like trying to reduce the Ukrainians on this line. There were no report about this, so I can't tell you if the Russians has already established some fire control of this road. If we're talking about just a physical establishing, yes, they have possibility, but maybe they allow the Ukrainians to move forces from Seversk towards Verkhnekamenskaya because of the fact that the forces in Verkhnekamenskaya have a big losses, and they're just like give them possibility to bring more meat on the front line. Now let's move to the south. There was very heavy clashes around Vershina and Zaitsevo, and if we take a look at this map, you see that Klinovo is still under the Ukrainians, but the Russians already established control over Klinovo, and this information, confirmation of this information, we can see on the Russian sources map. This one, Sporna, this one, Klinovo. Furthermore, you see that the Russians has changed the front line, and now they're moved a little bit to the west, to the small like buildings. I don't know what's kind of this, but as I understand, this is a very nice position for the Russian to establish something like the zero line. They're like fortified position, and using this position, they are trying to attack Vershina from the top, from the north, and to establish some fire control over Zaitsevo. So I think that we should. This is small. This is it. This is small area that also is under the Russians, according to the Russian sources map. So there was a very heavy clashes around Zaitsevo Vershina, and there were some report that the Russians, the Wagner group, entered this town, but as soon as they did this, the Ukrainians sent some reinforcement to this area, and they managed to push the Russians back. So we can say that they had a very successful counter-offensive operation, which forced the Russians to move back towards Klinovo and towards this area. Yes, from this point of view, this counter-offensive operation in Ukraine was very successful. But we should understand the cost, the price that the Ukrainians paid for this counter-offensive operation, and they paid a lot for this counter-offensive operation. If we take a look at the Russian sources map, they have already marked this area with some icons like losses of Ukrainian forces, rocket strike, another impact on the hangar. So if you remember, if we take a look at the map which shows us the disposition of the forces, now we're talking about the south, about the Ugledarskaya power plant area, this small cauldron. The Ukrainians on the Russian sources map, this is it, this is the power plant. As you can see, there are a lot of trenches here, and this area is totally fortified by the Ukrainians. You see these blue things, it's like trenches. And the Ukrainians, we can say, in a small cauldron, a small bag, artillery bag. And now let's move to this position map. And if you remember when I showed you this map for the first time, that was like something like a week ago, this area was enforced just with two types of forces, with 13th Mechanized Brigade and with this 108th Mountain Brigade Battalion, 10th Mountain Brigade, just with these forces. But later, during the week, the Ukrainians sent another mechanized brigade, 72nd Mechanized Brigade, just to stop the Russians. So that's why, because of the fact that the Ukrainian moved some reinforcement here, they managed to stop the Russians, because they understand that encirclement of Ugledarskaya power plant and giving possibility for the Russians to establish control over this part of over this south part is vital, and this bridgehead opens the door for the Russians toward Chasov Yar, which is very important town for the Ukrainians, because from We can say because from this point, if the Russians were able at least to establish control over Kadema and over Zaitsevo, over these two towns, we can say that this entire area will be under fire control, and the losses of Ukrainian forces in this area while supporting each other would reduce heavily. So the Russians are saying that they did a lot of damage while this battle. So there was, during these few days, there was a very heavy battle on the south near Ugledarskaya plant. This report, this part of operation was included into the Russian Ministry of Defense report, and according to this report, we can check this. The Russians managed to destroy more than 30% of that 72nd Mechanized Brigade. So the Ukrainians moved this 72nd Mechanized Brigade to the front, to the zero line, and the Russians managed to reduce this brigade up to 30%. So there's very big losses. Furthermore, this Mechanized Brigade has some groups, some artillery groups with the US 155 howitzers, and a lot of those howitzers were destroyed by the Russians' attack. Their main hangar was located in town by the name of Chasov Yar, this one. Take a look at the Russian sources map here. This is their hangar in this area. The Ukrainians were keeping these howitzers in this area, and the Russians destroyed, we can say, a lot of howitzers. They are not giving the real numbers, but according to this, after this strike of this area, around 30 soldiers were killed, and a big number of those howitzers were destroyed near Chasov Yar. The Ukrainians have big losses in this area. The Russians are moving very slowly. As you can see, there is no updates from the area between Sporne, Berestova, Bilogorivka. It's like Charlie Group, as we discussed yesterday. But I'm sure that there are very heavy clashes in this area. This area has a lot of Ukrainians, and this area is enforced with some mechanized brigades, some motorized brigades. So we understand that the battle in this area is very heavy, very heavy. Now, if we're talking about other Russian artillery and rocket impact, we can say that, for example, in Kharkiv area, there was an attack in Kharkiv, and it was a video from the city. The Russians attacked some base of some battalion in this area. The losses in this area are so big. If we take a look at this map, for example, there was an example with this 127 Defense Brigade. The Russian Ministry of Defense reported that the Ukrainians now try to include the prisoners to reinforce this brigade, because they don't have forces, they don't have volunteers, so that's why they were forced to release prisoners and to exchange their prisons, their life for freedom. So if they want to have freedom, they need to fight for the Ukrainians, and with these forces, with these prisoners, they reinforce this 127 brigade. As you can see, this defense brigade is located right in front of Russians, right in front of the area between Ternova, Stary Saltov, and as we know, the Russians are moving slowly, step by step, to the south using these forests, trying to develop their offensive operation towards Kharkiv. And this defense brigade has big losses, so this is the reason why they have reinforced this area with the prisoners. Furthermore, the Russians did some rocket attack towards in the Kherson, Nikolaev, Kherson, Kryvyi Rog area. For example, near Zelenodolsk, the Russians near Zelenodolsk and near Bereznegovate, near these two towns, the Russians attacked with their rockets, maybe with Iskanders, and they also managed to kill a lot of Ukrainian National Battalion forces. They destroyed the base of National Battalion Tornado. So we see that without even any offensive operation, the Ukrainians have very big losses. And to tell the truth, it's a very big question what is better for the Ukrainians. If the Russians are shelling them with rockets and artillery, or if the Russians are pushing Ukrainians in a real offensive operation, because at least if we're talking about offensive operation, like land, ground offensive operation, at least Ukrainians have possibility to attack and to do some counter attacks and trying to reduce the Russian infantry. But when the front line is stable, we see that there is just losses from the Ukrainian side. They have, for now, the Ukrainians, the big problem with Ukrainians for now, they have a very big army. As we discussed yesterday, they have around 1 million soldiers. And of course, you need to keep these forces, to hide these forces, and you can't give for one soldier one house. You need to collect them, like 20-30 soldiers with one place or another place. So that's why these places where the Ukrainians are trying to hide their forces is a very good target for the Russian rockets and artillery. And every day by day, the Russians report that they kill more and more Ukrainian forces just with rockets while their soldiers are sleeping or resting or just taking their positions and so on. Now let's move along the Russian sources map just to figure out about any other updates. There was a lot of updates from the Russian sources that Ukrainians started actively some RECO operation on Izum bridgehead in this area. For these purposes, they are sending all the time a lot of drones, trying to figure out the Russians' supply chains, trying to figure out the Russian bases, and a lot of those drones were destroyed while searching, while trying to spot the Russians. Of course, there are two questions from my side. Of course, we understand that this RECO might be some kind of operation from Ukrainian side to understand if the Russians are planning to start any offensive operation from Izum bridgehead, because more and more sources are saying that the Russians with the operation near Seversk are going and are planning to start offensive operation towards Barvenkovo, trying to cut the railroad, trying to cut this railroad, and this is the only railroad that connects the Donbas Arc operation with the big land, and this is the only one way we can say how the Ukrainians can bring a lot of heavy tanks, artillery to this area, massively, to take the trains with civilians, to change some tanks, some artillery, and bring them to Slaviansk-Kramatorsk agglomeration. So we understand if the Russians start any offensive operation towards Seversk, for better performance, they need to cut this line anyway, or to destroy some bridges like this one. It's a small bridge, but by reducing this bridge, they will be able to cut this entire area. The negative side of this, of cutting this bridge, is of course that the Russians will cut the only one way for civilians to escape and evacuate from this area. The only one way would be like using the regular roads, but not every Ukrainian have possibility to use their cars or buses to escape. Of course, their main and their favorite kind of transport is of course the railroad transport. So that's why maybe this is the reason why the Russians are not cutting these railroads, giving the Ukrainians civilians possibility to evacuate, because we understand that as soon as the Russians starts any movements towards Barvenkovo, there would be a lot of people who would try to evacuate and to escape this area, because the battle for Kramatorsk and Slaviansk would be very high and very hot. Now let's move one more time to Seversk. As I told you, a lot of Russian experts are saying that this operation against Seversk is useless without operation towards Zakitne. And we can say and we can constatate the fact that there is no movements from Yampol towards this area. So that's why I understand that the Russians are waiting. They wait when the Russians from the east side are going to take Serebryanka and maybe Ivano-Darivka, Vyimka. These battles are going to be very heavy, at least for Vyimka, Ivano-Darivka, because of at least mechanized brigades Ukrainian in this area. Anyway, I don't think that we're going to see any straight front attack Seversk in front, because I understand that Seversk is pretty well fortified, and to attack this town in front is like suicide operation. So anyway, this town should be encircled. We saw how the Russians successful in any encirclement operation. About the timings, I'm not sure. I can't tell you exactly when we are going to see the battle for Seversk, but I'm sure that as soon as Serebryanka falls, we can say that the final battle for Seversk has begun. And about the south, more and more updates and improvements are saying that there would be no straight attack towards Bakhmut. The main goal for the Russians in this area is to take control over Kadema. So this is the vital town, vital area, which allows the Russians to encircle also a very big group, Ukrainian group, on the south. If we are talking about the Charlie group that locates on the line between Solidar, Yakovlevka, Belogorovka, Berestovo, I think that town Berestovo is going to fall soon, and as soon as this town falls, I don't think that Ukrainians are going to keep forces on the line from Belogorovka and Yakovlevka for a very long time, because it's also very difficult, first of all, and to keep these towns means to have very big losses on this area as well. Now let's talk a little bit about other rocket impacts in this area. The Russians destroyed some warehouse near Seversk, so they reduced the shell warehouse with ammunition and so on. So now we see that they're preparing themselves, because Seversk group is on the online fighting all the time, and they need endless supply of shells, ammunition, and so on, and one of warehouses were destroyed. The same situation we can see in the town by the name of Drushkovka, this one. There was 2 impacts, and according to the pictures and the videos, there was impact something like marketplace and near. So the Russians destroyed the warehouse in this area as well. So we see that if you're talking about Drushkovka, this town is located between Kramatorsk and between Konstantinovka and Bakhmut. So I understand that this is some kind of supply area that Ukrainians were using to reinforce with shells, with ammunition, the south of Donbas Arc operation. And those warehouses were destroyed as well. So the final battle for Donetsk Donbas Arc is up to begin. So in a day or 2, we're gonna see something. Most of the Russian experts are saying that we won't see something very immediately. It will be very slow, step by step, but day by day the Russians will increase their pressure towards the Ukrainians' defense positions. And that's it for today. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon. Military Summary channel reminds you that we condemn any violence in Ukraine. Have a good weekend. Bye bye.